in a quiet medieval village where every whisper carried through the narrow streets and every secret was watched by suspicious eyes. A woman thought her heart had long turned to stone. She was 40 years old, a widow, respected yet painfully alone. But everything changed the day a young man moved into the cottage next door. He was 25, strong, quiet, and mysterious. At first, their meetings were innocent. But in a world ruled by strict rules and sharper judgments, their growing attraction would soon become a dangerous secret. And once desire awakens, some hearts refuse to be silenced. The village of Greybridge lay between thick forests and endless fields of barley. Stone houses leaned toward one another like old friends, and the narrow paths were always filled with gossip. Among the villagers lived Margaret of Greybridge, a woman known for her quiet dignity. Her husband had died 7 winters earlier. Since then, Margaret lived alone in her small stone house. At 40 years of age, she carried herself with calm strength. Her dark hair, touched lightly by silver, framed a face still strikingly beautiful. Many men had admired her, but widows were expected to live modest lives. So Margaret kept to herself. She tended her garden. She baked bread. She read the old prayer book by candlelight. Yet sometimes, on cold nights, she would sit by the window and wonder if her heart had truly stopped feeling. One morning, the quiet rhythm of the village changed. A cart arrived carrying a young man and his few belongings. His name was Thomas. Tall, broad-shouldered, with unruly dark hair and curious green eyes. The villagers whispered, "A stranger. Young. Unmarried." Thomas moved into the empty cottage beside Margaret's home. The first time they met was simple. Margaret was gathering herbs in her garden when she noticed him repairing his fence. Their eyes met. Thomas smiled warmly. "Good morning," he said. Margaret felt something strain, a flutter she had not known in years. She nodded politely. "Good morning." And yet, as she returned to her house, she could not explain why her heart was beating faster. Days turned into weeks. Thomas proved to be kind and hardworking. Sometimes, he would help Margaret carry firewood. Other times, he fixed small things around her garden. Their conversations began innocently. About weather, about crops, about village life. But gradually, something deeper formed. Margaret found herself laughing again, and Thomas seemed fascinated by her quiet wisdom. One evening, while the sky glowed orange with sunset, they sat on a wooden bench outside her house. The air smelled of wildflowers. Thomas looked at her thoughtfully. "You don't seem like the others here," he said softly. Margaret smiled. "And how is that? You look like someone who has lived and still has many stories left to tell." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt different now. Warmer. Closer. Margaret tried to ignore the feelings rising inside her. She was older, a widow. And Thomas was young, full of life. But every meeting seemed to pull them closer. Sometimes their hands brushed while passing a basket. Sometimes their eyes lingered longer than they should. And sometimes they simply stood too close. One evening, rain began falling suddenly. Margaret rushed toward her door, but Thomas ran beside her. They both stepped inside her house, laughing as rain soaked their clothes. The room felt small, warm, quiet. Water dripped from Thomas's hair. Margaret handed him a cloth. As he took it, their fingers touched. Neither of them pulled away immediately. The air between them suddenly felt charged. Margaret felt her breath grow shallow. Thomas looked at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. For the first time in years, Margaret felt truly seen. In medieval villages, secrets never stayed hidden long. People watched. People talked. Margaret knew this. That was why she tried to keep distance. but desire rarely listens to reason. One evening under the moonlight, Thomas knocked softly on her door. She opened it slowly. He stood there, nervous. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly. Margaret knew he was right, but her heart refused to send him away. They sat close beside the fireplace. The flames flickered softly, casting warm shadows across the room. Thomas spoke gently. "Ever since I met you, I feel something I cannot explain." Margaret looked down at her hands. "I am too old for such feelings." Thomas shook his head. "No, you are exactly who my heart wants." The words sent warmth through her chest. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Thomas gently took her hand. The touch was soft, careful, yet filled with unspoken longing. Weeks passed with stolen glances and secret meetings. Margaret felt younger, alive again, and Thomas seemed more certain with each passing day. One night beneath a sky filled with stars, they walked along the quiet fields outside the village. The world around them was silent. Thomas stopped walking. "Margaret," he said softly. She turned toward him. For a long moment, they simply looked at one another. Then he stepped closer. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I think I have fallen in love with you." Margaret felt her heart tremble. She had tried to fight it for so long. But hearing those words broke down every wall she had built. She smiled softly. "And I tried very hard not to fall in love with you." Thomas laughed quietly. Then, gently, he wrapped his arms around her. The embrace was warm, safe, full of affection. For the first time in many years, Margaret allowed herself to rest her head against someone's chest. And in that moment, the widow of Greybridge no longer felt alone. Chapter 7: Love Against the World. Of course, rumors eventually spread. Some villagers whispered about the strange friendship between the widow and the young stranger. But Margaret had already spent too many years living by other people's expectations. This time, she chose her own happiness. Thomas stood beside her without hesitation. And little by little, even the harshest voices faded. Because sometimes love does not follow the rules of age, or society, or tradition. Sometimes it simply finds its way into two lonely hearts. In a small medieval village, where secrets once felt dangerous, two people discovered something stronger than judgment. A love that arrived unexpectedly. A love that ignored time. And a love that proved one simple truth. The heart never grows too old to begin again.